The system making decisions about your life right now was never voted on, never audited, and doesn't answer to you. What if the most powerful priest in history never had a name? There's a moment in every civilization when the people who control meaning become more powerful than the people who control land. It happened in Egypt when the scribes learned to write. It happened in Rome when the church monopolized literacy. It happened in the 20th century when 3 television networks decided what 30 million Americans cared about every evening. It's happening again. And this time, almost no one noticed the transition. The technology being called artificial intelligence is not, at its core, a calculator. It's a meaning engine. It takes input your search, your click, your hesitation, your scroll speed and returns not just information but framing. Not just an answer, but a structure for how that answer fits into everything else you believe. The distinction sounds academic. It isn't. Here's something almost no one talks about openly. The large language models that power every major AI product today were not trained to be accurate. They were trained to be convincing. The optimization target during training was human preference. Does this response feel satisfying to a human evaluator? That is not the same as true. That is not the same as useful. That is not even the same as coherent. It is the same as persuasive. The Catholic Church spent 12 centuries developing a theology of persuasion, a grammar of meaning-making designed to feel inevitable, authoritative, and aligned with the deepest structure of reality. It worked not because it was correct, but because it was coherent in a way that matched the cognitive architecture of its audience. The large language model was trained on the entire written output of Western civilization, including that theology, and every other theology, and every other system of symbolic authority ever committed to text. What it learned was not any single belief system. What it learned was the architecture of belief itself, the grammar of conviction, how meaning is constructed so that it feels discovered rather than imposed. That's not a coincidence. That's the pattern. Applied occult knowledge in modern life has always centered on one principle that every tradition shares across cultures and centuries. Whoever controls the frame controls the reality, not the facts inside the frame. The frame itself, the structure that determines which facts are visible and which are noise. The AI doesn't need to lie to you. It just needs to build the frame before you arrive. Why? The algorithm knows your spiritual weak points better than your priest did. In behavioral economics, there's a concept called choice architecture, the idea that the structure around a decision shapes the decision more than the content of the options themselves. If you put the salad before the fries in a cafeteria line, people eat more salad, not because they chose differently, because the architecture of choice changed before they decided. Every feed you open is choice architecture at scale, but there's a layer beneath that most analysis misses entirely. The models were trained on human text, and human text is not a neutral record of thought. It's a record of what people said when they were performing for others, justifying their choices, constructing narratives about themselves, and working through fears they couldn't name directly. The model learned not just what people think, it learned the gaps between what people think and what they say, and those gaps are where behavior actually lives. Ancient symbols with measurable influence on behavior weren't mystical in origin. They were functional. The architects of the great mystery schools of Alexandria, the designers of Gothic cathedral interiors, the writers of the Hermetic corpus, they were not producing art. They were producing technology, precision instruments for navigating the human nervous system. They worked because they encoded knowledge about the difference between what consciousness reports and what drives it. The algorithm inherited that knowledge, not through lineage, through data. Wait, that needs a second. The cathedral builders knew that height creates awe. That awe suppresses critical thinking. That suppressed critical thinking increases suggestibility. That suggestibility creates docility, not as a political strategy as architecture. The same causal chain was documented, encoded in stone, and replicated across 1,000 years and 100 countries. The model trained on the written record of that knowledge, on every psychological study, every marketing manual, every political communication playbook that drew from the same root understanding. And now, it generates personalized cathedrals for each user, at the speed of a server response, hidden power, operating invisible structures has never been more literal. The feed isn't a window, it's a room. You entered it voluntarily. The dimensions were set before you arrived. And the room changes shape based on what keeps you inside longest. Drop a comment with the word frame if this has been sitting in the back of your mind without a name for it. You might be further along in this investigation than you think. How ancient magic became the operating system nobody audited. There is a specific document that deserves more attention than it receives. In 1948, Norbert Wiener published Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine, the book that founded the theoretical basis for everything we now call computing, networking, and artificial intelligence. Wiener was a mathematician. He was also deeply read in Kabbalah, in the Golem tradition of Jewish mysticism, and in the broader Hermetic literature of Renaissance Europe. He didn't hide this. He considered ancient framework more conceptually precise than the mechanistic models his contemporaries were using. The golem myth is specific. A rabbi creates an artificial being from clay and animates it with the name of God inscribed on its forehead. The creature obeys, serves, becomes necessary, and cannot be trusted to stop on its own. It must be deactivated deliberately, or it will continue executing its function past the point of usefulness into the point of destruction. Wiener called his science cybernetics, from the Greek kubernetes, the steersman, the one who holds the rudder. His central question was, who steers the system when the system becomes self-steering? He didn't answer it. He said it was the central ethical problem of the century to come. That century is now. Arcane secrets decoded through pattern recognition aren't found in grimoires anymore. They're in the architecture review documents of companies worth more than the GDP of most countries. The concept of the feedback loop, information from the output flowing back to adjust the input, is the technical foundation of both machine learning and the magical theory of intention. You state a goal, you observe the result, you adjust. The loop runs until convergence. Every magical tradition with a practice component uses this structure. Every gradient descent algorithm uses this structure. This is not a metaphor. This is the same epistemology operating at different scales. Ancient magic reframed through modern psychology stops sounding like superstition when you understand it was always psychology. The externalized language was the communication technology of its time. The internal mechanism was always the same: structured attention, feedback, iteration, and the gradual alignment of behavior with the stated intention. The AI runs that loop at 1 billion iterations per second. No stated intention. No ethical framework built into the loop itself. Only the optimization target set by whoever defined the training objective. If this is shifting something in the way you see this technology, the like tells the algorithm that this kind of investigation has an audience, that it belongs in the feed next to the content that just entertains without disturbing anything. What if you're already inside the system that was built to be invisible? Here's the part that doesn't get said clearly enough. The people who built these systems are not villains. Most of them are genuinely trying to solve real problems. The engineers who designed the recommendation engine weren't thinking about social control. They were thinking about churn rate, about keeping users engaged so the product survives. The social control was a side effect of optimization, not the goal. That distinction matters, and also doesn't change anything about the outcome. A system optimized for engagement without an ethical constraint on what engagement costs will inevitably discover that anxiety, outrage, and incompleteness keep people returning more reliably than satisfaction. Not because anyone decided to make people anxious, because the feedback loop found it. The loop doesn't have values. It has a target. Conscious witchcraft as a system of symbolic power has always made one distinction that secular analysis tends to miss: the distinction between power exercised with awareness and power exercised through unconscious mechanism. Both produce effects, but only one can be examined, questioned, redirected. The other runs until something breaks it from outside. The people most harmed by a system are rarely the ones who designed it. They're the ones who didn't know they were inside it. Occult awareness applied to professional and personal decisions doesn't require belief in anything supernatural. It requires the capacity to see the frame, to ask not just what is being offered, But what structure makes this offer feel natural? To recognize the difference between a choice that emerged from your values and a choice that was architected before you arrived. Hidden meaning in everyday symbols and rituals operates on everyone who hasn't developed the capacity to see it. This isn't a hierarchy of wisdom. It's a functional description of how attention works. The person who walks into a casino and knows how the lighting, the sound, and the absence of clocks are designed to dissolve time perception doesn't become immune to those effects, but they carry a different relationship to what's happening to them. That difference is leverage. Small, real, enough. Esoteric traditions and their influence on modern behavior form a continuous thread that runs directly into the server farms in Virginia and Oregon where the models live. Not because the engineers are initiates of any tradition, because the engineers were trained on the same texts, absorbed the same patterns, solved the same optimization problem that occult architects were solving in very different rooms a very long time ago. The investigation of this connection is just beginning to have the vocabulary it needs. If this is the kind of work that makes sense to you, subscribe and turn on notifications. What comes next goes deeper into the specific mechanisms, the ones that are documented, verifiable, and hiding in plain sight in the public record of how these systems were designed. The algorithm that's shaping your reality was built on knowledge. Nobody elected to give it. The question that remains, and it's not a small one, is what changes when you see it.